Thank you for coming, guys. Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about my favorite part about making presentations, which is coming up with a story. Okay, so who gave a presentation last week? Anya. Okay, how long did it take you to prepare your presentation? What you wanted to say, making the slides, and rehearsing in total? Give me an estimate.
Well, so it's like a 45-minute talk, so I probably rehearsed 3 times. The first time I did it was like over an hour, so several hours of just rehearsing. But preparing the presentation. So I actually recycled some of my slides from before, but what took me the longest was to prepare the introduction when I was talking about the conferences that I went to, and I was trying to tie it to what I was doing, and that took a long time. It was like several days of just thinking about it in the shower, like constantly coming up with some ideas of what I could say to make it interesting.
Cool. And how long did you spend making the whole thing? Like, give me a number for everything, even though it was throughout several days.
Okay, so let's say that I would spend like let's say, 5 hours of actually making the slides. Okay, 5 hours making the slides. Across, several days. Several days, yeah. And how long did it take you to figure out what you wanted to say, what you wanted to put in the slides? Probably the equal amount.
Another 5 hours?
Altogether.
Okay, perfect. In total, 10 hours. 10 hours coming up with what you wanted to say. No idea. Building, more or less. It might be 20. Okay. So, I agree. Let's say, so if you gave me 10 hours to do a presentation, I think I would spend 70% of the time working on the story. And then the other 30% would be split up between making the slides and rehearsing for it. So I'm always talking about the story, but what is a story, right? So, Gracia, tell me 3 things that you did today. Anything, doesn't matter, doesn't have to be important. You had Panda Express? Okay.
So that was like the highlight of my day.
Nice.
3 things?
3 things.
Okay, so I had lab meeting, and I also ate like pastries.
Okay. Is that 2 things? Do you want to make that 2 things or 1 thing?
2.
Okay, so you ate pastries, you had lab meeting, and you had Panda Express.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are your 3 facts. Now, tell me a story with those 3 facts. Like, tie them together into a story. Instead of just 3 isolated facts, tell me what happened.
What happened? I don't know. I had to wake up super early because lab meeting, as most of you know, lab meeting in my lab starts at 8. So, so I had to wake up around 6, and then I had to go out in the rain, which was very miserable. But then once I got here, there was like hot coffee, pastries, food, and we sat there for like maybe 3 hours. And it was almost time for lunch. So then we all took a walk to GSU, and got Panda Express. So that has been my day, basically.
So that was the end of the story. Perfect. So it's clear that was the story, right? What is your name? Kathleen. So what is the difference between the 3 facts that Gracia told us and the story? What would you say is the big difference?
Context.
Right, context. What else?
And details. And fuller picture, full stuff.
Right.
And we how they were connected.
Connections, yeah. So there was context, connections, details, all the background. So that's the difference between a story and facts, basically. So how do we apply these? When you have facts, they're isolated, and then if you want to make them into a story, you combine them. That's it. You just have to provide context, connections, make them relatable to the people that you're telling the story, and that's it. That's how you make a story. Okay, so can you finish this sentence for me? What do we remember? We remember things that we understand, that we like. We remember things that we don't like, that shock us, maybe. What else? What else do we remember? Things that relate to us, yeah? What do you think? What's your name? Kellen. What do you remember? What things do you remember more easily than others?
Sometimes it's pretty weird. I don't actually. I don't really know what makes it weird. I don't know. Like I say, sometimes writing things down.
Writing them down.
Yeah.
Okay. So like maybe making them part of your own story. Right. Maybe. So all of those are you said most of them. So things we understand, things we can relate to, things that we find interesting, and things that we find surprising. Maybe these are my top 4. So the whole point is that this is the stuff that makes up stories. So what we really remember are stories. How to make a story. Okay, so I've been talking about stories, blah, blah, blah. I have my own definition of a story, which I was talking to you, Adam. To me, a story is a bunch of facts that people remember. If you don't remember, then it wasn't a story. It was just a fact. So I have a 3-step process on how to take all the research facts that we work with every day and how to make them into a story. And the first step is to make a list. Okay? So a list is bullet point heaven. It's where bullet points should live. It's the only place, they were designed for this. You just write your little things. You don't have to expand on them. You don't have to worry about grammar or anything like that. Just list everything that's on your head. The first thing I do when I have to give a presentation is create a folder, put the date, the name of the presentation, and create a file called script. And there I just dump my brain, basically. I just start writing all the things that like you said, when you're in the shower, when you're walking around doing your groceries, and you remember, I should include this point. But it's like 2 weeks from now. So you're not going to start working on your presentation 2 weeks from now. But you can always create an empty file and I should talk about this, and then forget about it. So that's done. And then when it's closer to the time you have to present, you're not starting from 0. So that's the big advantage. And for example, I gave this one last week. This is what it looks like. You're just writing, nothing, don't worry about grammar. You're just writing, making a tab. You want to make a nested list, tab. So I use this text editor. It's called Sublime Text. It works great because it doesn't have any buttons. I'm not a big fan of apps with buttons, because if they have buttons, then you get distracted. You want to make the text bold, and then you have this organizational scheme, and then it autocorrects, so you have red lines under your text, and it's too distracting. So before I started using this editor, I was doing it on paper. So I would take my notebook and start writing. The problem is that I want to be able to iterate quickly, and if you have to erase everything you wrote to change it, you're not as willing to do that, right? So doing it digitally, I've transitioned, and now I write everything. Everything that I have to do, I do it on here. So I like Sublime because it gives me this mini map, and I can see the entire document at a glance. This might be 500 lines, and I can see them all at once. It's just powerful. And I also sketch. Okay, so you can't, if you have an iPad, maybe. I don't have an iPad. If you have an iPad, then maybe you want to do it there. But it's super helpful as you're thinking of these things, because they won't always be text. You might have this idea of a way you could explain a concept. So just jot it down on a piece of paper, and don't worry. There's no such thing as saying I can't draw. A lot of people say that I can't draw, I can't pick up a pen or a pencil because I'm not talented. Anybody can do this. So not a problem at all. What do you think so far? Easy, yes? Okay, so that's the whole point. If a list helps you iterate, you're going to come up with better ideas. Because to come up with better ideas, you just need to come up with a lot of ideas and discard the ones that don't work. So they help you try things out. They help you cut stuff. You gain perspective when you're writing it, and then you can rearrange stuff. So you start over. It's super powerful. I love lists. I know it's super minimalistic, and who cares about a list? It's where every good idea starts, as a sentence or a bullet point. Step 2. Once you have the outline, you want to develop it into a script. So I'm going to give you a deadly example that I used the other day for a talk that I had to give. So my outline, okay, so we speak in sentences, not in bullet points. And these are my bullet points. I wanted to talk about the goals for my project. I wanted to say that I was using multiple species, that say something about the viral diversity of these species and their impact to humans. So, I started writing. The goal of the project was to sample multiple species of jungle rats to see if we could detect viruses and their genetic material. So I don't really like jungle rats. It's probably not good. And we weren't detecting viruses. We were detecting nucleic acids. So the next step, so the next iteration, so they're rodents, and I want to look at the viruses that they harbor. And then maybe it's not genetic material. So I want to say quantify the relative abundance of genetic material. So I'm like thinking about this. It's just the way you write, right? You start going and it's not very pretty. And then it's like, I really don't like this because it's getting too complex. So at the end, I was like, okay, I'll just do this. The goal of the project was to determine the viral diversity of different rodent species living in the region, because I thought that was the simplest thing I could say. So you don't want to do this when you're live. When you're live, you need to have like a backup tape throwing words at you because you've already processed them. So if the first time that you're facing your bullet points, you have to come up with all that madness, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. You're going to start saying, So, and that's why a presentation might not seem smooth, because you knew what you wanted to say in bullet point form, but you didn't develop it into a script. So that's the advantage of writing. Writing forces you to actually go through the pain of figuring out, I don't know how to say this. I should be using this different grammar. Very useful. Okay, so who sees a big flaw? Harold.
When you develop scripts, don't you tend to try to memorize the script? And so the moment that you're trying to give your presentation and you try to stick to the script, the moment that you forget about a little piece, then everything else just falls out of sync.
Right.
How do you normally avoid this pressure of having to remember this very long script?
Right.
And I know you don't really depend on your slides. Your slides are mostly for your audience, right?
Yeah.
So you have your script in your mind. How do you cope with this?
So think about it. You just asked me a question that you hadn't memorized, right? Correct. So you're completely able of speaking things that are in your mind without having a script. So the whole point of having a script, of going through the pain of creating the script, is not necessarily to memorize it, but to give you the points where you can hold on to when you forget what you wanted to say. So you did that just now. You were thinking about your question, and then you verbalized it. And if it was super important, and there was a lot of people paying attention to what you were saying, and it was your responsibility to carry a talk, then of course you want to do that before. Here you improvised it, right? So you write your script in a conversational tone. That helps a lot. So if you're not worried about pleasing reviewers in articles and using very specific terminology and stuff like that kills your creativity, it's much easier to memorize. So you started with an outline, then you said, okay, how can I say this in my own words? Then you did that. Then you will do slides for it. And then by the end, you don't even have to think of the script because you already did it. By the end, the goal should be, how can it be as confident as possible so my nerves don't get in the way, basically. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay. So, yeah, go ahead.
So it's also how sometimes you tend to make a grocery list, and then once you actually write that down, you don't even have to.
You don't even need it, yeah.
So I think that it works like that.
Exactly. Yeah, because you visualized it in your head. You didn't develop it into an entire script, but it's because you're actually buying facts. You're buying items.
Say you sort of have something in the back of your head that you can fall back.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's just like chewing. Yeah, Gracia.
So I think I can see one problem with this, and that if you prepare the script and then you stand up there and just recite, whatever you wrote, then people might sense that and they won't really be interested. I guess you lose your audience if you stand there and just sound like a robot or something.
Right.
So I think you need to, write it in the language, like you said,
Conversational language.
Yeah.
So I've seen people that do a pretty good job reading their notes as they're giving the presentation. So it looks super polished if you do that. The problem is that then you can't react to your audience. Like if I was here, reading my notes, hiding behind the podium, reading my notes, it's a completely different interaction, right? So I'm not able to, like if you have a question, I might not even notice it because I was reading my notes. So this is like you're walking without a rope, and it's riskier at the beginning, but then if you have to give your presentation with somebody else's computer and you can't look at the presenter notes because it's a PDF, then you can still give your presentation. Or if the slides fail, you can still give your presentation, you know. So I just think it's riskier in the short term, but a good investment in the long term.
Well, and also I think the point is not to memorize all the words that you write down, right? It's to memorize the sequence and the context.
Right. And the slides help a lot with that. Because when you're talking, you're not really, you know what you want to say, but you don't remember what's coming next. Maybe. Like if I was behind there and I was looking there, I would see the next slide, but I'm looking at you, so then I had to look back. Well, oh well.
So to me personally, actually writing the script will help with memorizing the transitions between the slides.
Correct.
I think that's
I was going to ask
that. You can't grab from the slide. You can't just remember.
Right. You can also give yourself cues, like writing, you know what's coming next, or you write something that doesn't mean anything, but you know what's coming, stuff like that. You can do, there's tricks.
And something that I've done along these lines is when you write out your script, you can. I've made myself a little cue card that has just the first few words of the sentence, of each sentence.
Of each
and
slide.
then it's like you get going in the sentence, and then you're like, oh yeah, that's right, I was going to talk about this. And so you already have the concept idea, and then you have the idea set up in the words that you've written, and you've remembered the words that you wrote for the whole sentence, and it helps lead you into it. So that's kind of like, that was like both. Like you had a little bit of it memorized, but then the rest of it, once you get the ball rolling, it's okay.
So when you have your card, and like you finish saying what you were saying, do you just go like this?
Yeah, I'll just glance down, look at the next sentence, and then look back to the audience. Like, and at this previous workshop that you were seeing videos of me, and I did that, and I asked the audience, was this distracting? They're like, well, no, not really. You know, you look down and then you talk to us. So it's not actually, it's not necessarily a distraction. But
So only the beginnings, right?
just the first couple words of the sentence, so like set it up.
I tried doing something like that, and I realized that I wrote very small. So so you have to make it much bigger, because here you're like your vision goes down. You have like the tunnel vision. So like write it as big, at least as thick as a finger. I would recommend. That was what I noticed. So maybe the problem that I have here is only my problem, but I'm a super perfectionist, and when I'm writing the script, I can spend a lot of time worrying about the wording, and it's kind of a problem. So my big problem is perfectionism. And the way I cure it, does this happen to anybody else, or is it just me? Yes? Caitlin? What's your name? William. Does this happen to you? It's happened to you before? Okay, so I'm going to give you my cure. This is my solution to stop perfectionism. It's 80% ism. Okay? So if it's 80% good, it's good enough. That's my rule of thumb. If I feel like it's 80% good, or maybe 90% good, if you're like super.
95% good.
Stop at 90. I'm stopping at 80, so I have a little headway. So if you feel that it's like 80% good, just let it go. Let it go. And also wait for it. Like give yourself some time, and then the next day, well, we'll talk about that.
It's interesting. Like, have you heard the phrase 80% of the work takes 20% of the effort?
Sure.
And vice versa?
Sure. Yeah. Pareto's rule. It doesn't matter. The percentages doesn't matter, but that's always true. If you want to get from 90 or from 80 to 100, it's just not good. It takes a lot of work. It's usually not worth it.
Well, how do you quantify it?
It's completely subjective. It's completely subjective.
But like, when will I know that this is good?
When you feel that it's 80%.
You will feel good at 100%.
But
you'll never get there.
Okay, but unless you go from 0 to 100, unless you really think that everything you do is complete garbage, and then you magically hit the 100% point, then I can't help you there. But for me, it's a gradual thing. I think I'm like 20%. Okay, now I'm at 40%. You know, and eventually I do get to 75, 80%. Then I'm like, okay, this is good enough. Stop. Yeah. And the big, if you manage to convince yourself that you don't have to do a perfect presentation in your first run, it actually helps, because you can do things like sleep. Okay. If you want to make your writing 10 times better, the best thing you can do is sleep. Sleep will increase your creativity, everything. So last night I was finishing this. And I was like, I don't know how to finish this. This is too complicated. I just went to sleep. And the next day, I had 10 ideas. So go to sleep. So that's why I'm not going to say you should like do your slides 2 weeks before you have to present, because I don't do that either. But I do know that I need 2 to 3 days to get to the point where to my 80%. Okay. So if I don't give myself 2 to 3 days, I regret it, because then I have to spend, I have to sleep less, and I don't like sleeping less. So that's important. Sleeping. Another thing you can do to improve the quality of your writing tenfold is to wear different hats. Okay, you have a writer hat and an editor hat. And when you have the writer hat, you can't edit. So you're just writing. No criticizing, second guessing yourself. Oh, what I'm writing is complete garbage. Because the whole point of writing complete garbage is that it points you to the next bit of garbage that's a bit better, and eventually you get to the idea that you wanted to get to. And then you put on your editor hat, usually the next day, so you're farther apart from what you wrote, you're more objective, and you don't care about the little details, and you do this thing that writers say, you're more willing to murder your darlings. The phrases that you really liked, you read them the next day and they make you cringe. So that's a perfect indication that you should just delete them. But you can't wear both hats at the same time, because that leads to procrastination, frustration. It's a horrible feeling to be writing, saying, oh, this doesn't work, and I go back. It's just like, for that, when you're setting goals, we were talking about this before, if you want to write every day, don't set a goal that is completely within your control. So don't say, I'm going to write something that I'm really going to like. Say, I'm going to write 1,000 words. And if the 1,000 words are not good, then it doesn't matter, because you made your goal, right? If you write 1,000 words for a month, after 30,000 words, you're gonna write something good. So that's all. It's a numbers game. Do you agree?
Yes, but it's very amusing to me, because it's basically the monkeys and the typewriters that Shakespeare applied to myself.
It depends if you call yourself a monkey or if you actually have a purpose, right? You're not randomly typing.
Sometimes it seems like it when I put on my editor hat.
It's like what the other guy was doing. It's like, oh, it's
or when you show it to your PI.
That's a different monkey. Your PI for sure is wearing that hat. I've seen him wear that hat, so. Okay. Another strategy.
Before you move on, so this seems easy, but it's extremely hard to do.
Yes.
So what is so hard?
What is hard for you?
So the perfectionism part, I think. So when I used to write, especially when I started writing only in English, it was always hard for me to just go past like the first couple sentences, because I was always like, this is not it, rewriting. So now I'm aware of this, and I'm trying to do this, but it's very, very hard.
Did you ever play a musical instrument?
Yes.
So what did you play?
Guitar.
Guitar. Okay, perfect example. So if you want to learn how to play guitar, do you have to play every note perfectly and not move on until every single note?
No.
You just have to play for an hour for a month, every day, right? So every time you hit the note, you have to try to get better, right? At that note, the pinky note that never works. But there's like no alternative. And with music, it's super easy, because if you hit 80% or 90%. Like, if it sounds horrible, you didn't hit 90%, right? So it helps to have feedback like that, because you're not, when you're playing music, you're not subjective. You're like, either you hit the note or you didn't hit it. So I guess that would be my advice. Just like, you have to kill your inner critic.
Yeah, that's the hard part.
It's the hard part, yeah.
So I have a question on that. Like, you write, you keep writing for months, and after that, I know that I'll probably get better, but how much better? Like, I don't have feedback from other people, and I hate to ask other people to read my thousands of words that doesn't make their time matter. So, how do you judge yourself, I guess?
Okay. It's a great question. I mean, I struggle with this all the time. So thank you for asking. So think about it. First of all, you just have to do it. You just have to keep writing. And you will eventually get better. But the key is that you have to love the process, or at least don't really dislike it. Okay, if you don't love the process, you're going to say, so when I'm asking you, commit to writing, become driven about writing, your brain is weighing the pros and the cons. Like, how much do I have to pay emotionally, and what output am I going to get, and is this worth it, right? So at some level, you're thinking that. So you have to get away from the outcome mentality. You just have to embrace the process. It's super hard. But it actually, if you do that, if you convince yourself that it doesn't matter how good you get, that the important thing is not your results, the important thing is sticking to the process, you will get very, very good quickly. Actually, yeah.
Okay, so the thing is, English is not my first language either, and so when I start writing, like I don't go back to see what I've written. I'm like, day 1 and day 2, I'm just going to write what I have so far. And like day 3, so I have thesaurus open, and I'm like looking at other words, and I'm trying to put it together. But that's how I like to edit. Because like, if you're writing, like he said, if you're writing, don't go back to see what you've written. You're just like, I want the ideas out there. Once I have my ideas, then you put it together. And I find that helpful. So that answers your question at all.
Yeah, when people suggest you should keep a journal of all your writings, it sounds like a horrible idea, because why would you want to read your horrible writings? You know, it's like, so I've kept journals in the past and I never read them. But the point was not to go back and read your masterpiece. Your point was that because you had a journal, it was easier to make the commitment to do it every day. So it was easier to develop the habit, and the goal is the habit.
And also, I think that the key in what Akshay was saying is that I think it would be easier if we had like a certain compartment, like a time slot in which we're only writing. And I think that a day, like, you know that it starts at some point, it ends at some point, and I know that until it ends I just can't switch, because I think that my problem was before that I would just never know when is the right moment to actually go back and start editing. Yeah. Because maybe I don't want to write the whole thing at once, because I just maybe don't have enough material, you know, I haven't thought of other parts. So if I want to go back to actually edit what I've already written, I think it's important to have like a one set time when I know I can't switch my hats.
Right. And sleep. So after you sleep, go back to edit. Right? Yeah.
So it helps to have a plan beforehand, right? And then you can't change it. Like, you know you have to write a paper. So you decide, okay, so I have a week to write a paper, or to write the first draft. So I'm going to write for 5 days, and then I'm going to spend the last 2 editing. But you have to write for those 5 days, right? So make it whatever commitment you're comfortable with, because you're committing to yourself. You're not committing to your PI. You're just committing to your future self. Exactly. So it just takes practice. So the last tip on how to improve your writing by tenfold is to be willing to delete the stuff that you don't like. So besides my script file, I had a scrap file. So this helps a lot. So when I'm writing and editing, I'm like, this is not good, but I like it too much to delete it forever. So I just cut it, and I paste it in a different file. And then I never look at that file ever again, but I know that if I ever, like the 1% of times that I do looking for it, it's there. So that helps a lot. Because otherwise, all your crappy writing is infecting the good writing, and then you can separate them.
So. That's the problem that I have. I have a problem with letting go of parts of my writing that I really like.
Just create another file and like keep it there. It'll be there when you go back for it, looking for it. If
you ever do go back.
You will never go back.
Yeah, I know.
So it's actually funny because I've written something like this before, what I wanted to talk about today. And as I was writing, so I finished like this entire train of thought. And then I found the exact same train of thought, 500 lines later. I'm like, did I duplicate it? And I realized that I did it in 2 different times. It's just that the first time that I wrote it, I internalized it. And then when I wrote it again, so that just means that you could delete most of the stuff that you think should be deleted. Because if it's worth remembering, you will remember it, right?
I just wanted to ask, have you ever tried using like a versioning control system for your writing?
For writing?
Yeah.
No. I've heard of people that want to convince writers to do it. I haven't done it. It would be just for statistical reasons, for fun. Like, that would be my advantage, right? To see how many changes I did every day, how much I deleted each day, how much I added.
Also, you would be able to roll back to some older, sections that you deleted.
But it's adding a layer of complexity that I'm going to use very little. Like, I know most of the time I'm not going to do that. For code, yes. For writing, I think it's different because I don't version my writing and it's not as critical.
You would know when to do it, and you have to remember to actually,
I mean, working with source control is hard with source code, and you have to do it. And writing is hard enough just by itself. So if you add another layer of complexity, I'm sure there are editors that do it for you. I'm pretty sure there's something in the market. I know you like productivity tools. Look for it, because somebody has integrated Git with writing, for sure. So you just have to find it. You can use Google Docs. Yeah. The problem is that I found it really hard to compare different versions.
Google Docs is a minimalist version where you can get rid of a lot of the stuff.
Oh, it does?
I think so.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. They don't call it, there's a different program that calls it Zen mode. Is GitHub have a Zen mode?
No, but
so basically it does just what you described. It makes everything, all the extraneous stuff go away. It's just an editor, but not only that's Google.
And Om Writer is also nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just end up typing on your screen. Yeah.
Make it easy. If you don't have a screen, you have a notebook, then use your notebook. You can't do version control on your notebook, but okay. So anything else before we move on? Yes. No. This is my summary, my mid-talk summary. If you want to come up with a story and you have all these research facts in your head and you don't know how to convey them, make a list. Just dump your brain into a file or a piece of paper, do all your sketches, and then figure out the connections, the background, make it related to other people, and come up with a story. A story is a bunch of facts that people remember. If you didn't remember them, it wasn't a story. And then edit with perspective. This is my favorite step. You get to put on your editor hat and look over the shoulder at your past self. But really, don't be too hard on yourself, because without those mistakes that the guy did last night, you wouldn't be at the position you're in that morning. So when you start editing again, so it's super important to embrace the process. You're never going to go from. You're not a printer. You're never going to write a book from the first word to the last word of the chapter. You're never going to do that. You're iterating. And the better you iterate, the better quality you will have at the end. Adam?
I have another question. It's my experience that writing isn't just putting words in paper. Writing is organizing ideas, but also what happens when you're writing is that you might find that there's another analysis that would answer a question that you
Totally.
So, I mean, but it seems like, if you, and I agree with the idea of just setting aside a block to write, but if writing also includes going back and analysis and plotting something that understands something, it seems like it could interrupt the flow. How does that fit?
So if you're in the middle of your writing session and you realize that there's this super important analysis that you didn't do you stop writing to do your analysis?
I always do.
You always do?
I always do. And well, actually, this is probably a bad practice, but when I'm writing, what I'll often do is I'll write a sentence that it's kind of like the sentence is a hypothesis, and then I'll look for evidence in the literature.
Confirmation bias?
Hypothesis,
sure.
Right?
Sure.
Well, which is also, that's also sort of writing, but it's not writing because you're searching literature, you're reading, and you're synthesizing information, but it's all part of the writing process.
Right.
Which is why writing takes.
So I'm taking the whole writing thing as a summary. So the writing you were going to do for a presentation is going to be less intensive than when you're writing a paper. I really struggle on what goes in order to be able to write a paper with all the references and the literature search. That's like a different talk. But in that case, if you're stopping in mid-writing and you don't want to do that, so just have a firm goal. If you have a firm goal, like you told somebody that you're doing an hour every day, or you told yourself that you're doing an hour every day and you're tracking it. So I have an Excel sheet and I check in every time I start working and I check out every time I stop. So I have a goal of an hour of writing every day, and if I don't meet my goal, I know it. The problem is when you don't know, you met your goal, right? So if you have an hour deadline and you haven't met it, then you can't stop. But if maybe you've been writing for 2 hours and you only wanted to do 1 hour and you find this, then perfect excuse to stop writing for the day, right?
And that's true. It's a good point. I kind of forgot that. We're talking about presentations here. When you're talking about your presentation, presumably you have all of the stuff that you want to have to say already done.
You just don't. You want to figure out the best way to say it.
Just say it.
Right. No, but good point. So before I forget, like all the stuff that I'm telling you, they're not rules, or if they're rules, you can totally break them. But the whole point is to know why you're breaking them, right? Like if you have a better rule, please tell me. But if you don't have any rules, then you can use mine. That's it. So a big thing for me when I'm doing presentations is the transitions from like the beginning and the middles and the end. I'm still working on my ending presentations properly. But I'll give you my ideas and you can tell me what you think. So let's start with the beginning. The goal at the beginning of a presentation is to convince the people that are not really on board with what you're saying, the topic that you described, and at least convince them to hear you out. Okay? So if you start out with something like this, the people that don't care about CFDO, whatever that is, I think it's a thing. If they don't care about what that is, this slide is not going to convince them that you have something interesting to say. You might have something interesting to say that totally applies to what they're doing, but you're just not marketing your talk in the way that you should. And we're in science, right? So should we be worrying about marketing? Well, yes, we should be worrying about the way we present our ideas to other people, because there's too many ideas floating around, and you need to know which ones you should be paying attention. So if you do something like this is just my solution in 5 minutes, at least there might be the possibility that you will hear something interesting, or you're not completely shocked, or that what you're seeing is just like the most boring thing you've seen in your life. So this is saying, to me, hear me out, and before you judge, my what I have to say about barnacles or whatever I'm talking about. The next slide that usually comes after the horrible cover slide, it's either an outline slide or its cousin, the background slide. And they're pretty similar. It's just a bunch of bullet points describing facts without context. Okay, these facts are not very interesting because, like, if you are an expert, you're bored because you already know this. And if you are a newbie and you have no idea what this is, you're also bored because this is not how we acquire new information, by reading bullet points. We need to hear stories, and we need context and all that stuff. So a list is not a story, remember that. This works great for when you're making your list, the first step. But this person didn't move it into the script. So if you don't write the script, you have the problem. Okay, so that's a good point, actually. So maybe this person did write the script, and they're describing it properly and telling you this whole story, but they have this as their background, which is not ideal because this is competing for your attention. So if I have a picture, you can totally process it in a millisecond and go back to what I'm saying. But if you have this, you cannot read and listen to me at the same time. So you're actually hurting your chances of being heard, understood. So start with something like this. Like, tell us why you've spent the last 5 years on this project. Why, if you're doing your defense, why did you do your PhD? Like, what's cool about it? Something you would tell maybe not people in a bar because they might not want to listen to you, but someone that's super interested in what you have to say. How would you tell them what you're doing without boring them? Like, there's no worse feeling than somebody asking you, so what do you do? I love science, and telling them what you do, and they're like, oh, that sounds like super boring. Because it's not really boring, because you can make boring things, you can make them sound interesting. And the reason why you work on those things is because they are actually interesting to you. It's a problem of communication. So keep it casual at the beginning. I think it's good advice. Another background slide. All these facts, there's just like piling on. And if you know all these facts, you're bored because you know them. And if you don't know them, who cares? So there's a lot of facts that you can share when you give a presentation. The big problem is curating which ones should you use, right? Because we have this fear that if we don't include every single fact related to our field, then somebody's going to call us out. It's okay, you didn't include my paper, or you didn't include this super important fact. So if you're telling a story, you can always pepper your story with facts, but just don't give them all at once. Maybe out of this, there's a couple that are important. So you're telling the story. We think that this thing makes sense because the incubation period is, and then you tell your context and you tell your fact. And that works perfect because it's a fact that you can remember. Oh, the reason why they told me that is because the incubation period was short. So that's a fact that works. Another thing you need to keep in mind at the beginning is that you have to come down from the mountain. You've been living in this artificial mountain surrounded by your colleagues, and you think that everybody lives there, but it's just you. Maybe your department. Maybe within your lab, it's just you and your advisor. I mean, sometimes not even your advisor, it's just you. So that's completely fine. Just any direction. It's completely fine to be in your own mountain, you know. It's the problem. That's not the problem. The problem is that you have this opportunity. People are like getting close to your mountain because they came to hear you speak. So you can choose if you want to stay up here and talk to them from there or go down. So I suggest if you want people to go all the way up, go down to meet them and take them all the way up. So start with something that everybody can relate to. It doesn't matter what their background is, what department they come from, if they come from a different lab. There's always something you can tell them that everybody in the room is going to understand. Adam? Might you run the risk of boring people who are already halfway up the mountain, people all the way down? That's a common concern. So something that I've discovered is that when you tell facts that you already know, so when you tell a fact to people that already know it, and you tell it well, that makes them feel smart. Mm-hmm. They're like, oh, I like the way you said that. And I already knew it, of course, but I like the way you said it, right? So there's this thing, like, most of us are in bioinformatics, and there's this aligner called BLAST. Where do you guys come from, by the way? What's your program? Cell molecular biology and mechanical engineering. Material science. Cool. Okay, so we work with biological sequences, and we have to align different genomes and sequences and see, find phylogenetic relationships between different species. It's a lot of fun. And there's this program called BLAST. So if I'm explaining to you what BLAST is, everybody here on this side of the room knows what BLAST is, right? Or we think we know. And then I say, so we just blasted these sequences. So that's one way to do it. You know, like everybody knows what BLAST is. I'm not going to worry about explaining something so simple. But you can say, like, okay, so let's do this test. How would you explain BLAST in a sentence? You're the expert of the aligners. I want to hear what you might have to say. How would you explain BLAST in like a sentence?
One sentence. So when I think about using BLAST, I usually think about it in the context of you have a genome or a set of genomes that you want to search through. And you have a sequence that you want to find inside that set of genomes somewhere. And BLAST is a tool that lets you find that particular sequence that you have inside of your library of genomes.
So what's the key defining feature of BLAST compared to all the other million aligners that there are in the world? Speed. So the key of BLAST, so that's like your first idea. If you're talking about BLAST, mention that it's a fast aligner. It doesn't cost you anything to say BLAST is a fast aligner. People are not going to say, I already knew that. That's so boring, you know? So, okay, it's fast. So why is it fast?
Because of the way that the alignment, because of the way in which the library is searched.
How is it searched?
It's searched by discarding sequences as you find different levels of similarity. And so as you find more similar regions within, that's going to be complicated.
It's fine. So I'm totally putting you on the spot, but this is what you should be doing if you want to mention the word BLAST in your talk. You want to say, okay, so like this is too complicated. Okay, so backtrack.
It uses similarity, the concept of sequence similarity, to discard some of the library sequences, and so you don't end up aligning your single sequence against this whole bunch of sequences that correspond to the genomes, but only to a very few that are highly similar to the one to your query sequence.
And what's the trade-off? Why doesn't every aligner do that? What's the problem with BLAST?
Speed versus specificity. So it depends how, versus sensitivity. So it depends how sensitive, how much you care that you find, perfect, that sequence within.
A perfect sequence. So BLAST might not give you the perfect sequence.
Optimal.
The perfect, exactly. BLAST is a fast aligner because it doesn't guarantee an optimal alignment. It can give you one, but it might not be the best. So that is, we had to search for it, right? Like we supposedly all had experience with BLAST, but that's not something that just came out like that, like today is Thursday. So once you have it, now you're not going to remember it. You're not going to forget it. BLAST is a fast aligner because it doesn't give you the optimal alignment. You can just mention that, and the people that have never heard of BLAST in their life, they know something about that. So you provide a context to a fact. And that's super powerful because you can do it, if you do it with every new term, technical term that you introduce in your talk, then they all add up, and by the end of it, you're like, I learned a lot from that talk, even though I've never heard of barnacles or BLAST or all that stuff. So start there. Okay, so there's a big problem that this happened to me a lot at the beginning. So you start a new project, and you're super excited about this new project, and it's about B cells, for example. Dan told me his story about B cells. He was looking for a way to classify different tumor cells, and he started learning about B cells. He spent an entire week reading a B cell book. So, wow, B cells, they're so cool. Now I have to give a presentation. I'm going to tell everybody about B cells. But his talk wasn't really about B cells. He was talking about how to run the classifier. So it's super tempting to focus on the background. So I used to do this too at the beginning when I started working with the microarrays, which are a way of measuring gene expression. I was like, I'm going to explain to everybody so everybody understands what I didn't understand about microarrays, which is like they have these two colors and then you're comparing the different things, blah, blah, blah. But like that wasn't the point of my talk, right? So I'm not sure, does this happen to you guys or is it just me? That you fall in love with the background, but you want to skip over the meat of your story because you don't think you did a good job or stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff going on there emotionally. Akshaya?
So sometimes I feel like you need to provide audience with a solid background so that they get on track.
Exactly.
And sometimes I do get lost with it. Like sometimes it may be too much background, but oftentimes people don't really see why you're doing is interesting unless you have a lot of background. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That the challenge I run into with background is that adding too much. I mean, you learn all about B cells or whatever it is that you're doing, but not every little bit of B cells that you learned about is relevant to the story that you're going to tell. But it's easy to lose track of that.
Correct. And I mean, that's where I personally think this also happened to you. Become afraid of being called out. So you want to make sure that you're showing how much you know.
Right.
At the cost of just deviating from your main message.
You're going to give a completely different presentation if your goal is to show how much you know versus if your goal is to get everybody on board, right? So you have to be honest with your goal. Like maybe your goal is to show everybody how much you know, but.
So for me, I think part of the problem is like, if you're talking about the BLAST example, and you're trying to explain to someone what BLAST is, and you have in your head, okay, it's seed-based and it's going to use local alignment, you have all these facts, and they don't know what aligners are. Maybe they don't even know what genomic sequences are. You have to start somewhere. Like what I do is really odd. Not very many people know any of the background for the work that I do. So like to start at the bottom of the mountain, I'm going to have to go through a lot of background before people can figure out what it is that I'm doing and why I feel it's important. So that's a really hard balance for me, because I know that a lot of the background doesn't have to do very much with what I do, per se. But it's hard to understand what I do without a lot of background.
Right. I completely see your point. So it reminds me of the Higgs boson. How many explanations of the Higgs boson did you hear during the months before it came out? And how many stuck? Like for me, it was just one. I heard this guy explain it in a specific way, and then it's like, okay, that's all I needed to hear. Like the way you explained it made all the difference, because I heard 30 explanations before and I never got it. So I'm sure you had a similar experience. For me, it was the guy that told me that the Higgs boson was a snowball running down a mountain, and yeah. When you're running down the mountain, the snow is the Higgs field, and then the boson is going down and it's rolling, and that's how particles acquire mass. Well, he gave me that metaphor. I might not remember the details, but I know where to look it up, and I'm not going to forget that metaphor. I forgot every other explanation people gave me. And the Higgs boson is pretty complicated, right? Like, there's a lot of background you need to understand that. So it's not realistic to expect that I'm going to really understand all the math that's behind it. And maybe your audience is not going to understand all the little clever things that you're doing. But maybe you don't want to tell your audience the clever things you're doing. You want them to understand a broader picture, a more abstract picture. And it's hard to come up with that metaphor, the snowball running down the mountain metaphor. But I will never forget it. So it's your opportunity to tell people a story that they won't forget. What do you think?
Yeah, I think if you can figure out the important pieces for them to know, that's a great thing to have. But for me, it's really hard to figure out what is the pieces that are important for people to know.
You know what helps a lot? Writing. So like if you write every day about your subject, eventually there are topics that come up again and again, and topics that you avoid because they're hard. So the more you try to write about things that are complicated or difficult to explain, the better you get at explaining them. Because you're sending a signal to your brain that is, a brain, like, this is important. We want to get better at this. So when you're not writing, when you stop writing for the day, your brain keeps working. And then the next day, when you keep writing about the same thing, it's like, okay, so this is the stuff I came up with when you weren't looking. And if you do that for a month, eventually you are going to be able to explain what you're doing on an elevator ride in 2 minutes. So if that's something that's interesting to you, think, how much time am I spending every day trying to explain what I do to other people? How much time are you spending every day?
Well, I mean, the past week I've been trying to explain what we're doing in response to, like, reviewer comments, so it's a lot of time.
Right. And that's a different audience, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to talk to a reviewer.
Normally not that much time. On a normal week, I'd just be like, okay, I'm just going to be writing my code and not worrying about how to talk about it.
It's up to you. It's completely legitimate. You get to choose your goals. If your goal is, I would really like everybody in this room to understand the big picture about what I do, realize it's going to take work, and you can totally do it. And if you don't want to do it, you're not going to do it. That's it. It's up to you. It's doable, right? Okay. Don't fall in love with the background. Fall in love with this guy. That's the important. That's why we came to hear you speak, to talk about the meat. So a way I like to approach it, you're doing your research and you generate a bunch of results. You have a bunch of plots, you have a bunch of figures, tables, and stuff that you really want to show. So the problem is that we're too close, right? We're too close to our results to imagine what it was like to not have seen them, to see them for the first time. So what I suggest is that you spiral around them. So you ask, you see this plot, and you say, okay, why did I generate this plot? Why did I do this experiment that resulted in this plot? And then you say, okay, I did it because of this. So what does that show? It shows that speed and velocity are correlated. Okay. So why is that important? Does your audience understand that there's something about that correlation that is important? You know, they might not know the significance of that. So those are the kinds of questions you have to do. You have to ask. And they're super basic, but they might surprise you because you might realize that, oh, wait, so by thinking about this, you will naturally come up with a structure for your talk.
I feel like that only happens to me when I force myself to approach my talk with the mindset of keeping things really, really basic and really simple, both slides and language. If I try to sound, if I try to use big terms or make things like super complicated, I miss that. Only when I'm
right.
like, okay, it needs to be simple.
Right.
Only then do I realize that I need to be asking myself those things.
So when do you not? So So when you're giving a presentation, you ask yourself, do I want to make it simple or do I want to sound smart? Is that the inner dialogue?
I guess somewhat, or not necessarily sound smart, but you wanna be able to showcase what you've done. It's not about, I don't think it's about showing off. It's just about showing your work, and sometimes you want to show it in a way that it actually does you justice.
Sure. So that's a totally legitimate fear. I don't want to dumb down my content so people will understand it, right? Is that a fair assessment? Yeah. Right. So you totally don't have to dumb it down, and people do want complexity. Like everybody likes complexity, as long as we get it, right? So there is a way to walk people to really high peaks without making everything look like a boring hill. But it's harder, right? The easy part is to not even go down the mountain, just stay up and just like circle around the peak because you're already there. But you will be by yourself. So every time I approach a new presentation, I ask myself, why am I doing this? And the reason why I do it is to make indifferent people teachable and to make teachable people driven. So at the end of this talk, like, I want you to take action and do something to improve the way you approach presentations. It might be as simple as having a discussion with somebody else that you wouldn't normally talk to about this stuff, or getting a book, or doing something that I didn't tell you to do. And when I'm giving a science presentation, what I want people to do is, so people that can benefit from it, I want them to go read the papers or to try it out in their research. And people that just heard it for the first time, I want them to remember that this is a thing and that it's not scary. You know, I'm always meeting biologists. I met a biologist the other day at Dana-Farber, and she was telling me that what we do is crazy. You know, the bioinformatic community, what we do is crazy. I don't want to have that interaction with her. I don't want to have to convince her that what we do is not crazy. Like, humans can understand it. You know. So if everybody in every community picks up this goal, like I want to make my work easily understood to other people, we wouldn't have these problems. We wouldn't have also a lot of the perception that the public has about science. Because when we want to sound smart and not come down the mountain, that's when the problems come. So, but that's a completely different field. I'm not going to go there. Yes? So spiraling. Super important. Another big tip is when you're talking about stuff. I'm sort of doing this right now, but since it's a small context, I hope you'll forgive me. So I'm piling up tips, because this was a presentation about tips. I don't like to give tips, because tips only make you teachable, but I promised I was going to do it, so here are my tips. But when you're giving a presentation, a research talk, you don't want to say, oh, and this is just, and you hit your slide. This is what we did. Yeah, and then we did this thing. And, well, okay, now we also tried this other approach. And, like, next slide. So it's super tempting to just go click, click, click. But people want the connections. Like, tell me the reason why today you ate at Panda Express, because I really want to know. And you do have a story. You know, I didn't know you had pastries because you woke up early for a lab meeting. So that's the story. And if you tell me, I'm more likely to remember. And the whole reason why you're giving me this talk, why you're giving your presentation, is because you want me to remember what you said. So instead of piling things up and changing course and not following the threads, I suggest that you extend the storyline. So every time you introduce a new concept, what you want to do is to, when you add a new piece, relate it to it. And sometimes the connections are not obvious. So you might have a completely different tack, but you somehow find a way to combine them. So the other day I did 2 experiments, and I didn't know how to talk about them, I thought. So I'm going to explain my first experiment, and then I'm going to talk about the second one. But I didn't want to do that because I was piling 2 experiments, and what was the connection between them? It's true that I did both of those things, but I wanted to combine them. So I realized that the beginnings and the ends of those 2 experiments were similar, or at least different enough that comparing them would be interesting. And it's not something that I thought about at all, because like 4 months went by before the second came, from the first to the second. So just by thinking, I want to combine this so it's not 2 independent things, they're 2 related things, they're easy to remember. It takes time, but it's also more fun for you as a presenter. So extend your storylines and combine them. And now the endings. Okay, I'm not good at this and I don't know why. So I would like to hear what you have to say, but I'll tell you my story first. So of course, at the end of your presentation, you want people to do something. You want them to remember what you said a month from now. Like, if I ask you what Gracia did on May 1st and I ask you in June, so you heard the story, you should at least remember that there was something related to Asian food, okay? That was the whole point of the first story.
You always eat junk food, okay? So I hope this
Asian food is not junk food.
What you remember.
This is going to be recorded. This will live forever.
We'll bring it up every once in a while.
Do you remember when Gracia ate at Panda Express? So, but you do want to bring it up when it's like this big talk that you spend 45 minutes, an hour, or whatever, how long we spent. You want to remember what you, because the whole reason why you came was to get something out of it. And if you have been to too many talks that when I leave, I forgot the title. Like, I don't even know what it was about. I have no idea. So what do you want people to remember? So what you show at the end is something that's going to stuck. It's going to stick for a long time. And a lot of people do this. They do thank you. Okay. I'm not saying you shouldn't do thank you on your slides, but so it's really funny. Kate sent me this thank you slide, and it was. Have you seen this? So like every member in the lab dressed up as a bunny, and like thank you. It's super funny. She probably wouldn't do it in a conference.
She the faces of all the members in the lab and put them over characters that were just
in funny poses.
Yeah, they were like ballerinas and people coming out of hats, and obviously the PI was one of them. Yeah, in funny poses.
Yeah. So she was doing, I guess, an internal talk, right, in the departmental talk. I thought it was super funny, and she probably wouldn't do that in a conference. She just did it because she thought it was funny. Okay, but then when you show that, that might drive the conversation in the hallway. Like, you're not going to talk about the science. So in a way, you're sabotaging the whole talk, because at the end, everyone's going to remember that. Like, your research must be really good to overcome that, you know. So, and also, okay, another pet peeve I have with thank you slides. If you show your thank you slide, and there are 40 people in the thank you slide, it's the same thing as not thanking anyone, or saying, I want to thank everyone in my life. Like, if you really want to thank people that were instrumental to your research, thank them during your slides, when you show the plot that person helped you generate. If you want to show their names, you can just thank them. You know, thank you, Gracia, for helping me with the camera. I don't have to write your name here, unless maybe I'm the PI and I want people to contact you, and then I write your name so they know how to spell it. Okay. So that's a reason to show your name. If you just show your name because everybody shows everybody's names, then we're just doing things because we like to follow convention. And since when do we follow convention in science? Okay? So we're always questioning why we're doing things. So that's my problem with thank you slides.
Going into this, like those acknowledgement slides are like everyone hates them, but they have to be there.
That's why I have a question mark. So that's a different story. That's a different story.
Why did you mention me? You know, why wasn't I like? In a way, you sometimes decide like if you're gonna list someone from your lab, you have to list everyone. Someone's always going to be offended.
That's a different story. Okay, this is a super important point.
Yeah.
Do you want to say something?
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, like, can't you just like have your conclusion and then like not talk at all about your acknowledgement slides, and then put up the acknowledgement slides after and be like, does anyone have questions? Like,
right.
I mean, you could do that when you're
it's
talking
a
about
valid option.
people
It's a valid option
during the body, but like you said, like you have to put it there. Like, I think the NSF would be happy if you didn't have it.
It's a different story. So, for example, would the NSF complain if you show their logo right next to your super killer result, right next to their plot? You know. So, like, if you have this goal, that you need to acknowledge your funding. If I am funding you, I don't want to wait until the end. Like, I want to be right next to the result that shows that your knockout mouse actually is like the solution to cancer. I want to be right there in that slide, okay? And if I helped you do that experiment, I want to be right there.
Yeah, but then you won't put your advisor's name on every slide.
But that's a different story. That's a different story. So that's not your funding. So a funding agency will have some.
On every slide either. Like you often have a small number of funding agencies that you can put them on on every slide?
Yeah.
Well, you can put them not on every slide. What I'm saying is maybe you put them on the killer slide. You know, like on the. It depends. It depends.
Well, honestly, that feels like a distraction. It would be like, here's this really amazing result, NSF.
So yeah. Well, what do people put in their slides? Like they put their name, they put the slide number, they put the template that Microsoft Word told them or PowerPoint told them they should put. So like, why not put just one more thing? I'm completely playing devil's advocate, but I just want you to think about why are you acknowledging all these people in the last slide. Let's get back to that. But you wanted to say something?
Say other labs. I was going to comment that
PI other
in regard to the if you put NSF or whatever by the whatever thing it was, I think people would forget about that by the end of the presentation.
Yeah. Forget about what? That it was the NSF.
Yeah.
But don't you just see the logo and realize that it's the NSF?
Yeah,
but thank you.
I mean, like if it's there.
Funded by NSF.
Funded by, sure, you do that. But if you do it in the middle and you have multiple things, then by the end, that message, you know, like you always want, I'm sure like the last advertisement before the credits or something on a TV show is worth a fair amount because it's going to be like the thing, unless people skip it, but it'll be the last thing that people see before the show ends.
Right.
So, I don't know.
But you bring up a great point. So, first of all, is that why you do it? Did you already have this conversation in your head and did you really think about it? Right. So, I'm bringing out 2 points. I'm not saying that my solution works great because I'm just like playing around, but I do want to encourage you to think, like, is the goal of my presentation to come to the end and then thank my funding agencies? Everybody does it that way, but it doesn't mean that that is the most effective way. And also think of the opportunity cost. Like, your last slide is important, okay? I think we can all agree that the last slide is important. And when you're having your discussion, you do want to have something showing, but maybe it shouldn't be the acknowledgement, because there are all these people that nobody's heard of, and you're doing them to satisfy their egos. So that's a reason to do it, but it might not be the reason that the problem is that you didn't think about why you were doing it, but you're still doing it because everybody else does it. Go ahead.
Well, I also saw some presentations that they put a thank you slide in the beginning. Like, first of all, I would like to thank these agencies and people who funded this research, and then continue.
Yeah. Yeah, PIs tend to do that, right? Because it's super obvious that the PI didn't actually do all the work, so they feel a bit weird talking about it. So the first thing they do is acknowledge. So that's just another solution. So if it works for you, do it. I would be, if I was the one that was being thanked, I would rather be in any slide but the last one. Because the last slide is to show something that should be remembered. And I don't want people to remember me when I'm in somebody else's presentation, right? I'm just like the credits. The credits are at the end of every movie, but nobody watches the credits, right?
Unless they put the special bonus thing, like at the end of the credits.
Do you want to have bonuses in your presentations?
At the last slide, sure.
You could do that.
Your credit slide and then have something really interesting as the last slide. Like, it still works.
You could also have
explore different options. That's all I'm saying.
And I think it's really important, actually, it's really important to have names on the slide. Because, like, when people read names, they're reading names on a slide, they're also reading the name on a paper. So it's very different, like, because then you have the visual recognition of, like, say, this person, oh, I saw that person in these papers that I was reading. Like, it's a lot more than just attribution and, like, egos and everything. Like, actually having the names printed up there. Because, like, some people have last names that you have no idea how to pronounce unless you say them.
Sure.
So I think that, like, yes, it's a big list of slides, but also it's really not part of your story, which doesn't mean it shouldn't be there. But just like, it's not part of the story that you were giving. It's like, this is the credits.
But I like it because that's the whole point. Like, if you tell me there are all these reasons, why are you telling me not to do this? Break this rule, because it's not a rule. Like, I don't even call it a rule. But if you're doing it because you want to satisfy other people's egos, blah, 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 then you should realize that that's why you're doing it. That's all I'm saying. That's why there's a big question mark there, because I haven't really experienced, so I haven't had to thank that many people. 10 years from now, I might have a different idea.
Thank you, Pat. Is the thank you slide the only part of the ending you're talking about, or does the ending include the conclusion and discussion?
So yeah, the whole point, so this is just my intro to the ending. I'm going to give you an alternative about what should be a good idea. They're both, you could combine both, okay? You could have your conclusion slide and then the acknowledgements, and then maybe you can go back to the conclusion before people start asking questions. So that's what's showing, and that's what people remember for the 15 minutes that people are asking questions. But you already acknowledged other people. So there's a lot of solutions. Harold, you wanted to say something?
No, it was already covered.
Okay, so yes. Conclusions. This is a typical conclusion slide. And this person clearly had an agenda. They had this goal, like I want to tell people to remember this and this and this. But I don't think it's very effective because it's full of facts without context. The guy explained them before, so right now you would assume that they know what you're talking about. But like, why add all this text that nobody wants to read? Because you don't want to read it. So think about it. Just because you have all these goals, just because you want to talk about all these things, it doesn't mean that you have to show every single one. If you want to talk about 10 things, only one will be to remember. If you talk about 3, then maybe all 3 will be to remember. So like, this guy had a killer image, and he didn't show it on his conclusion slide. That is a perfect picture to show the eye balance osteotomy thing. And he's talking about this plot, which he showed before. He says that it's statistically significant or something. I don't see a big statistically significant thing there. But like, he was proud of this, I'm sure, because she showed it. So this is a perfect thing to show at the end. Like, remember, this is my takeaway. Much better than just this, because then people have to read it. What do you think? Yes. And then you can have your thank you slide.
That's big, big words. And so people not only have to read it, but they have to internalize it. And if it's a long presentation, by that point, it might be
that's a good point.
They're just like,
their like tolerance for this kind of stuff goes down by the end. So you should be like extra simplifying when you get to the end. So you get to something like this, you're like, okay, I can remember this, and then maybe show all the people from your lab with a big picture, and everything works great.
have rolling credits.
That's not a bad idea. That's not a bad idea. Not only because like you could have big text rolling up. I might try that sometime. Like if you really have 35 people, on with perspective, I love that. I love it. So this is my conclusion slide. We talked about beginnings. This is what you should do at the beginning. Convince people that are indifferent about your topic to hear you out. Then when you get to the middle, you want to start at a place where everybody can follow you up the hill. And it's hard, but like, why give a presentation if you don't want people to go with you? If you don't want them to go with you? And spiral around each point. So the reason why I say that I'm not very good at endings is because I feel like I'm repeating myself. But I haven't found a better way. So like, this is really a few of the things that I want you to remember, along with make a list, and then write the script, and then edit with perspective.
So regarding this, what do you think of this phrase that people repeat in science, where they say, in the beginning, tell people what you're going to talk about, then actually tell them what you're going to talk about, and at the end, remind them what you talked about. And now you're doing this last part. But before this, what you were saying is don't do that. Just give them a story where you tell them everything that you want to talk about, but in sort of like a sequential, sort of story type thing, as opposed to just.
Right. So you're saying that before I was telling you a story, and then I stopped and I gave you bullet points.
Yeah.
Right. So I see when people do TED Talks, which they train for 6 months, I think, to do TED Talks, which is great. Like, I didn't know. I just thought everybody was super talented.
Yeah, me too.
They train for 6 months to get those polished things. And I always pay attention to the way they start and the way they finish. And the way they start is usually they just dive in. No, hi guys, how's everybody doing? I'm going to tell you about this and this and this, and then I'm going to tell you about this other thing, and then I'm going to tell you about, who cares? Like, just start the movie. Just hit play. Who wants to read the credits? Like, you want to watch the movie. And then decide if you like it or not. So they always start with a story, the way I call the story. They're just telling you something you could hear in a bar. Completely conversational. No, well, it has been brought up to our attention that this field of research deserves more, like I read that in abstracts and it's not what draws me in. So they just get started. They cut to the chase. And then when they get to the end, they talk about this big goal, right? Super inspirational thing that they hope the world is going to change. And I don't know how much that translates into departmental talk. I would like to make my endings more like that, but I also don't want to come here and tell you that this is going to change your lives. Well, it might, but I'm still struggling with that aspect. But what I do know is that when people tell me, this is what I'm going to tell you, then you tell them, and this is what I told you, it's not very satisfying, When you give me a lot of intro and no context, I'm like, come on, get started. I don't care what you're going to do. I follow you. I trust you. I trust your organizational scheme. So just go for it. And then by the end, I'm like, oh yeah, that was really good. Where can I find out more, right? I guess. I'm still struggling with that, but it's a good point. Yes.
So one thing is, at least in regard to your conclusion, or here, and you're like, oh, it's not that great, whatever. What you could do for your, to make it more TED Talky, is say these 3 things can, make you amazing, or whatever. I mean, that's essentially what the TED people say. This will change the world. So you could do that, or you could actually provide more information about, say, you could also go look at these resources for more information.
Right.
So provide the driven more information. That would be a different tactic than just iterating through.
So apply to a research talk. So imagine this is like a motivational talk. It's super easy to give you things that you can relate to. But if I'm talking about the sodium channels in the gallbladder, what do I give you at the end?
I mean, so you could say kind of more general. I mean, you would kind of recap a little bit, but then you could synthesize it and say that, these things together, in conclusion, these things together could cure hiccups or something. And then our future work will do, so you go off into the horizon a little bit and say, we're hoping to be able to characterize the best hiccup cure ever. And then you can even invite the audience and say, if you would like to talk about this more, please contact.
That's a great point. If you are at a conference and you're finishing the talk, one of your goals should probably be to meet as many people as you can. If you get to give a talk, by the end say I would love to help you apply what I talked about in your research. And then people have an excuse to go up and approach you and talk to you. So yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. In a department, you could also do the same. You don't talk to every people in your department. Give them an excuse. They might be intimidated about what you're doing. So that would work out great.
One of the things I've seen and I was encouraged to when I was at a conference was your last slide, you end it with thank you, but you also leave your contact information.
Sure.
Because a lot of the time, you're like, I'm William. Now let's delve in.
Yeah.
And you forget who you are.
Yeah.
You forget where you're from. You forget who your PI is. Yeah. And then at the very end, you leave your email address, because some people put it on the front page. You leave your email address and phone number, where you're from, who you're working with, and so it's no longer just a thank you. So it's thank you, contact me, and you can put a disclaimer on the bottom, and you can put acknowledgments, and then that way you're not wasting 5 slides showing less important information, and that way people can't complain that you're not thanking them. You just don't have to actually say thank you to these people. It's on there. If people want to read it, they can. But more importantly, they know who you are and who you represent.
That's a great point. I really like it. Yeah, put your business card on the last slide.
Because it's the last thing they see, right? So if you say in conclusion, here's all my stuff, and you click next slide, say, if you'd like to talk more about this, contact me. And then if you want, you can put references on there as well for what papers you've written for that as well.
Yeah. Good point. Josh?
No, that's awesome.
Just giving you props.
Yeah, and what Callan was saying about maybe instead of a conclusion, just going you have your future works, and that's a future works would transition really great into a business card, contact me slide, I think.
Right.
If you have ideas as to where I should go next.
Yeah.
Also, what you mentioned, you know, well, it was what people mentioned about seeming more approachable, about your willingness to help other people use what you've done. That's something that PIs just fail at. I feel like whenever they present, even if the research is really good, most people will feel a little intimidated about going, professor, can you help me, you know, work your stuff into my research. But if you're vocal about it, especially at a conference, that makes you seem a lot more approachable.
Has anyone here ever? I haven't. Has anyone ever heard of seen a presentation where the end was like, here are some things that I imagine could really help what we do, but we don't have the expertise. If you have this expertise and you're interested in what we're doing, come talk. We can have something that's happening. Right. Has anyone ever heard that? Because
no, but it's a great idea.
Inclined to do that. Like, oh, I know about that thing. This is pretty interesting. So let's go talk. Right?
Do you think it's an ego thing? People don't want to show the stuff they don't know.
I don't know.
Maybe an ego thing.
I was pitching for investment opportunities and stuff, like a recruitment session or something. Right. That's how
at the I think recently the chemistry super meeting that they have every month or so, they had a speaker that was interested in some collaborations. He didn't have a slide per se, but he said, hey, we're doing some of these things. If you he just did it in a sort of a casual way, but he definitely made an intention to talk to people and stuff.
It might be the ego thing. It's easy to understand not wanting to talk about things you don't know, but of course what we don't know for all of us is far more than we do. It's just everyone knows that they don't know most things.
You should totally spearhead that. I will follow.
All right.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask a trivial question?
There are no trivial questions.
Our presentation is all about our research. We want to get credit for what we have done, your research. But most of the time, people say, we did this, we have done this. Do you use we or do you use I have done this? Which one is it?
Well, yeah, good question. I haven't given this much thought. I
use passive voice.
So I try to avoid the passive voice as much as I can. So are you talking about writing papers or talking?
No, writing paper, we most of the time we say we, because we have multiple authors. But during presentations, I also use we most of the time. Yeah. But I feel like I don't get most of the credit for the part I did.
Well, do you think it's unclear about what part you did and what part was contributed by
right?
People?
Yeah.
Because it should be pretty clear. Like if you made this plot and did the analysis, you did it. Like I made this plot.
Do you think it would help if, I mean, you don't necessarily have to say I, but if you give credit throughout your presentation to the people who provided data, then not only are you acknowledging their effort, but you're making it clear, you're creating a separation between what was provided and what you've done. Because I think it's assumed, as you say, that if you present a plot, that you did it, unless you say that somebody else did.
Well, that actually is a criticism of some talks that I've heard, is that it's when a talk includes a body of work that was produced by a large body of people, and sometimes even when it is acknowledged, it isn't clear what that person did. They're presenting a body of knowledge to you, some portion of which they have done, and it's not always clear.
I think sometimes you can tell what part each person did, or at least what part they didn't do, right? Because of the way they explain it. So for us, like when people talk about the bioinformatics, they say, they used some advanced bioinformatic algorithms or stuff like that. So they didn't do it. But you have to think, what is your concern? If you think you are not getting the credit you deserve, and you're presenting, there's no reason why you shouldn't use I, if you think it makes sense. If it's something else, then we can discuss it. Well, what do you think is the main problem with we and I?
My project's very interdisciplinary. I get help from other engineers in the lab, but I did most of I did all the experiment and data analysis and stuff. But the ideas involved in the instrumentation part, it's a collaboration of different engineers. So when I present, I use a system. I built a system, but the system also has ideas from other people. So most of the time I just say we develop this system to do these kind of measurements, and we're interested in this kind of study, and maybe I should say I, but I feel less confident when I say I did this.
And that's something to work on. Like if you know you should say I, then say it. And they're completely interchangeable. You can combine them and say like these people really helped me create this. Like you said this, right? These people helped me, and this is what I wanted to do, and that's why I approached them. For example, you can tell the story of how you got started, stuff like that.
Yeah, my thought was like just telling how it happened. Like we were talking about this idea, and then I went and implemented it. Like you're just telling the story of exactly how it happened. It's very natural. Gives the activation where necessary.
Yeah. Cool. So, do you guys think this is too much work? Like this whole thing, this whole process from beginning, like you have to create your list, and then you have to write the script, and then you have to think of all the little things, you have to rehearse. Do you think this is too much work? And how does it compare to the way you've created presentations in the past?
I think that once it becomes a habit, it's going to get much easier.
Is this very foreign to the way you've been doing your presentations?
Not very, but there are still some things that I need to work on, like the endings. It's definitely my thing.
Yeah. I normally create scripts. I try to come up with the slides, and then I see if whatever story I want to tell in my head fits the slides, and try to think of ways of connecting.
So you start with the slides, and then you fit the story to the slides?
I feel like that's how most people do it.
Yeah, my list is my slides.
Yeah.
I will often write text in the slides and sometimes replace them with pictures.
Right. So do you see a limitation when you're transitioning between different slides? So the big advantage that I see from using a single file is that it's much easier to just copy and paste without having to worry about, because at the beginning of your story you don't know how you're going to break it up, and you might pay a lot of attention. You might dedicate a lot of slides to an introductory point, and then realize that is beefing up your background, and that you didn't really need to talk about that. And it feels like more emotionally taxing maybe to remove all your slides than it is to just delete a bit of text and put it in your scraps file. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't have a set of scraps slides, but I think I do exactly the same process as you. I don't invest a lot of time and effort in the slides at first. Most of the slides just have titles, and then move things around if you need to.
Right. And once you have that slide with text, do you build upon them, or do you recreate them from scratch? You know what I mean? Once you have text, are you tempted to just leave it there, or do you start from the beginning?
I will remove the text.
You remove the text. So then why have this slide?
Because it's like a list. I'll remove the text and replace it with a figure or a picture, or I will delete a slide because the text, I will say the text or something. It's the same process.
Where do you put the things that don't fit in a slide?
Text.
Well, I guess you can always put anything in a slide.
Or tables.
But sometimes, for example, if you don't know if you're going to use it or not, if you don't know if it combines properly with the stuff that came before, because the other problem with the slides, I guess, is that you're following a linear order, right? And you're not going to create 100 slides. You might have 500 lines of text, but you're not going to create 100 slides. And maybe you do need 100 slides and then to pick 20. I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I agree with Adam on that. And, as long as I completely understand that we're always limited by the real estate on the slides. And you can't, even if I start writing something without thinking completely about the slides, then I may fall in the trap of having something that I want to say from the beginning to the end on one slide, but it's not going to fit.
Right.
And then,
when
I try to put it, so I'm limited by the size, then I've tried, so maybe I can do it on 2 slides, but then, on top of that, I need to come up with a new story to connect the slides so that each slide actually has a beginning and an end. It's like a closed idea.
Right.
So I think that in a way, all those steps will be interweaved. You want it or not, you will be able to write the script and go start making your slides, go back to your script based on the real estate on your slide.
Yeah.
And then work on the transitions between your slides and maybe add that to the script. So at some point it's going to be some going back and forth.
Right. I was telling you this linear process, but it's never as linear. The advantage is that you're coming up with the slides in your head, but you don't suffer from the constraints that PowerPoint gives you. Like if you're writing and you fill the entire slide and then your text is in the gray area, it doesn't feel nice to write in the gray area.
Well, that's exactly that's been my point. Like if I find that my slide goes off the gray area, like, well, I need to do something different with this collection of information.
But maybe you needed to keep going and write like this much, and then when you get to the end, you realize that you could summarize this whole thing with a couple sentences. But you're not enjoying that opportunity because the tool constrained you in a way that wasn't ideal for what you wanted to do. So like if you could have a piece of paper that you don't have to flip it, it would be even better, right? But we do have so sometimes when you're writing, you're like, I don't feel like writing, and then you get to the end of the page, you're less likely to maybe keep going than if you're in the middle. That is a completely artificial constraint. And if you could get rid of it, you would benefit, right? So that's why I want to stay far away from apps that have buttons. But you wanted to say something?
So are you sort of saying that the script isn't actually a script, it's more about a framework for ideas that has
the list is the framework, and then I expand that into sentences.
Okay, so the script is accurate. So when you compose a script, it's actually what you're going to say, and then you have to distill what you're going to say into some form that fits onto PowerPoint.
So that comes later, right? So first I have the entire script that I could give without slides. And then once I have that, as I'm coming up with that script, I make a note. You should probably have a slide here, and then I do a sketch. And then at the end, like a day later, when I'm happy with the entire script and how you can draw a line to separate the text, and that could be like your slide. Then you start thinking, okay, now let's illustrate this. But if I don't have time to do slides, I won't do slides. If I have to give a presentation to somebody that just came to the lab and I have 3 hours until I get to meet with them, I will not do slides. I will just do the script and maybe show a couple of plots that I already generated. Yeah.
I mean, another thing that I do is actually I don't always make presentations with the goal of presenting them. I use presentations as a research annotation tool, like keeping track of this one project that I was doing, because then if someone wants to know about something that I was doing, I'm just like, look at my slides. But I had not even planned on presenting them, but it's a logical way of organizing a bunch of plots and some information.
Have you tried OneNote?
I've heard of it, but I haven't used it. I use Google because Google
is it free or?
OneNote is free now.
Well, there's an app. There's an app, but it doesn't have like all the capabilities. I guess that if you have the full program, that you do have to pay for. But yeah, that's how I keep my lab
you can
notebook.
use like Evernote.
Evernote, yeah. Because it doesn't have the important thing is like infinite scrolling. That's what I want. Infinite scrolling. Don't tell me when I have to stop. Right.
I think, but I'm attracted to making slides in my research for the opposite reason, is that if someone is interested in a particular plot, it's already packaged in a format that I can just send them off to someone or share with them. And it's very
but an image is something you can already send, right?
Yeah, but not a sequence of images with some text in between. It's like it's much more robust, like rich environment than just a plot.
Cool. Yeah, and that has a purpose. Like if you're sharing your data with your collaborator, has a different purpose than if you're giving a presentation. So it's super tempting to just combine them and say, I'll just reuse it, right? But yeah, because your collaborator has time to stop, read the legends, do other things. When you're presenting, you're like, next slide, next slide. Last comment? Okay, so I'm done. So last week I told you, come up with a topic, something that you would be willing to present during the last talk. Maybe an idea that has been hard or challenging to explain in the past. And now this week, so what I'm suggesting is give it a try. Try writing the story first, and then see if you like it or if you don't like it. So just like, I speak at 50 words a minute, so I know when I'm giving a presentation, so I know that if I want to have 10 minutes, I need 500 words of my script, more or less. So that's another advantage of writing on the script, because later I can see how long it took me, how many words I had, and then I can estimate, for a 30-minute slide, how many words I need.
You like your stats.
You're crazy.
I'm crazy. Yeah, totally. I track my time and I track my words. It's the advantage of technology. It's crazy.
So, I'm really surprised you're not wearing a Fitbit.
Yeah, I never got into that.
You need to get a GoPro.
Yeah, why? To record? I'm recording right now. To record my life. It'll be iNatural. I'll have it right here. Yeah, they quantify itself. I haven't really got into that aspect, but I really like to track important metrics, right? How many words are you using, and how long does it take you to do things?
You mentioned that.
Sublime Text has a word count. What do you mean?
Well, you said, I speak out so many words per minute.
Oh, I gave a presentation, and I did the script that I had done. So, and then I said it took me 40 minutes, and then I had 2,000 words. Okay, so I speak at 50 words a minute, I guess. You could also record yourself and see how long it takes you.
But then you would actually have to know that you strictly follow that script.
More or less. Come on, I'm very wishy-washy in that aspect. So this is what I'm saying for next week. So if next week you come with the story, or you have the story in your head, it will make more sense to all the stuff that we'll talk about how to illustrate it. So that way you already have this, you don't have to start from zero. So we're not recording anymore. And then the last one, what do you guys think about doing a Secret Santa slide makeover? So the way this works is you send me your slides, I send them to somebody else, and I send you somebody else's slides. And then we can anonymize it so it doesn't show. You don't know who's in it. And then you pick a couple slides, one or two. Maybe you pick multiple slides that you want to combine into one, or the opposite. You take a slide and you break it up into multiple slides. Or you just take a slide and you change things to make it more effective. And then next Thursday, you present the slides that you changed. And you tell us why you changed this or why you changed that. So who would be willing maybe to do this? To send me their slides, and you will get somebody else's slides, and then we will do this.
But not like a full presentation slide.
So I was thinking about if you send the entire presentation, the person has to redo your slide. They're not going to redo the entire slideshow, but they have context. So that might help. If you give them only one slide, then yes, they might just change that slide. It's up to you. Whatever you want.
So maybe we can just point out, okay, I need help with this slide, and look at this slide.
Okay, that will work. So you could send the entire presentation and say, focus on this slide. Perfect.
Or
yeah.
you can just submit one or two slides and then put in some notes, the context of this was this and this and this. That way.
Sure. That works. Whatever you guys want, just send it to me. What were you going to say?
So I was just going to say that, so I'm at least going to try to send you old slides and not make new slides.
It's up to you.
Because I think that if I make them, I'm going to...
What do you mean make them? No, yeah, you should give me your previous, from the last talk you gave, right? Don't make new slides. Don't make new slides. Don't natify it. Don't. No. So slides from your last presentation, something like that. Okay? So I'll send it out, and then we'll see. Yes, question?
I'm assuming this is like a PowerPoint thing.
You can do PowerPoint, PDF, Keynote, whatever you want.
But so how would somebody redo it if you send them?
Well, if you send them a PDF, then they can redo it manually. I mean, it depends. So if you don't want to send, so it's up to you. You don't have to do the makeover. I think it's more fun if you do the makeover. But if you just point out things that could be improved, it's like being a critic versus being a maker. It's really easy to criticize other people, but then when you sit down and try to change it, you might see problems that you wouldn't have seen if you hadn't tried to make them. So I encourage you to try to remake other people's slides. And if you have a PDF and you can't remake it, then maybe you do it from scratch, or you put fake data. If it's a plot, I don't know. We'll see. You can take a screen capture of the stuff that you want and maybe rearrange the pieces.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Well, okay. Thank you for coming. And
for next week.
So I'm going to send an email. So I'm committing to have the video of today's talk today or tomorrow.
Or at least the slides.
Or the slides will be for sure. Yeah, they're already done. But I'll try to have this edited more or less. So more people can do it, because I don't know why 8 people told me, I really want to come today, but I couldn't make it. So they can see what we talked about, and then we're all on the same page. Today or tomorrow. And then you will have to send me your made-over slides on Wednesday or Thursday. So just before next week. Okay? Cool. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.